The fluorescent lights of Henderson and Associates hummed with that particular frequency that made Thomas Spencer's jaw ache by noon. He stood outside conference room B, his daughter Lily's hand clutched in his, her backpack sagging against her small shoulders. Through the frosted glass, he could see the silhouettes of 4 people seated around the table, his performance review committee. They were 7 minutes into what should have been his meeting. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. "Daddy," Lily whispered, tugging his sleeve. "My tummy feels funny." Thomas crouched down, his knees protesting the movement. At 34, he sometimes felt twice that age. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just 5 more minutes, remember? Then we'll get your favorite, Mr. Spencer." The voice cut through the hallway like a blade through silk. Victoria Chen stood in the doorway of conference room B, her charcoal suit immaculate, her expression carved from marble. She was the firm's CEO, a woman whose reputation preceded her like a cold front. "You're late." "I'm aware, Ms. Chen. My sitter." "I didn't ask for an explanation." Her eyes flickered to Lily, then away, as if the sight of a child in the corporate hallway was an optical illusion she could will away. "We've been waiting." Thomas felt Lily's grip tighten. He could feel her small body tensing, the way it always did before the tears came. "Not here," he thought. "Please, not here." "I apologize," he said, straightening. "It won't happen again." Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. "See that it doesn't." She turned on her heel and disappeared back into the conference room, leaving the door ajar. Thomas looked down at Lily. Her brown eyes, the same shade as her mother's, though he tried not to think about that, were already glassy. "You can do this, Lilypad. Remember what we practiced." She nodded, but her chin trembled. Inside the conference room, the air tasted like expensive coffee and judgment. Marcus Webb, the CFO, sat with his fingers steepled. Janet Reeves from HR had her laptop open, her expression professionally neutral. David Park, the operations director, offered Thomas a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thomas guided Lily to a chair in the corner, pulling out his tablet and queuing up the educational game they'd downloaded the night before. "Volume low," he whispered, handing her his spare earbuds. "And if you need me." "I know, Daddy." 3 taps on your arm. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, then took his seat at the table. Victoria didn't waste time. "Thomas, you've been with Henderson and Associates for 4 years. Your analytical work is exceptional, no one disputes that. Your projections for the Meridian account saved us from a significant loss last quarter." "Thank you," Thomas said, though her tone suggested a "but" was coming. However, there it was. Victoria slid a folder across the table. "In the past 6 months, you've been late to 17 meetings. You've left work early 42 times. You've declined 6 after-hours client dinners and missed the entire San Francisco conference in August." Thomas opened the folder. The numbers were there in black and white, each absence meticulously documented. "Ms. Chen, I understand that my situation has required some flexibility." "Your situation," Victoria interrupted, "is not the company's responsibility." The words hung in the air like smoke. Thomas felt heat creeping up his neck. From the corner, he heard Lily's game amid a cheerful little jingle, grotesquely out of place. "I'm not asking the company to be responsible," Thomas said carefully. "I'm asking for understanding that single parenthood requires. Everyone has personal lives, Mr. Spencer." Victoria leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming once against the table. "Marcus has 3 children. Janet is caring for her elderly mother. David is getting his MBA at night. We all have responsibilities outside these walls." "With all due respect," Thomas said, and he could hear the edge in his own voice now, "those are not the same as being the sole caregiver for a 6-year-old. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Irritation, perhaps, or something colder. "Then perhaps you need to reconsider whether this position is the right fit for your current lifestyle." The room went silent. Even the hum of the lights seemed to pause. "Are you firing me?" Thomas asked. "We're suggesting," Janet interjected smoothly, "that you consider a leave of absence, unpaid naturally, to get your personal affairs in order." A leave of absence. Thomas tasted the words. They were bitter. For how long? "That would depend entirely on when you're able to commit fully to your role here," Victoria said. Thomas looked at each of them in turn. Marcus wouldn't meet his eyes. Janet's expression remained professionally blank. David at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Daddy." The word was soft, but Thomas heard the tremor in it. He turned to see Lily standing beside his chair, tears streaming down her cheeks, her small hands twisting the hem of her shirt. "Daddy, she's crying again," Lily whispered, though her words made no sense. She was the one crying. Then Thomas understood. Lily wasn't talking about herself. She was talking about the imaginary friend she developed 3 months after Sarah's death. A girl she called Emma, who appeared whenever Lily felt scared or alone. "It's okay, sweetheart," Thomas murmured, pulling her into his lap despite the inappropriate setting. "Emma's okay. You're okay." Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I think we should reschedule this meeting, when you can give it your full attention. Ms. Chen, we'll have HR contact you with available times." Her voice was final, absolute. She gathered her materials and walked out, her heels clicking against the tile with the rhythm of a countdown. Marcus and Janet followed quickly, murmuring apologies that meant nothing. David lingered, his hand on the doorframe. "Tom," he said quietly, "for what it's worth, I think this is bullshit." "Thanks, David. But she's not going to budge. You know Victoria, she believes work is sacred. Everything else is just noise." After David left, Thomas sat in the empty conference room with Lily in his lap, her tears soaking into his shirt. Through the window, he could see the city stretched out below, thousands of buildings filled with thousands of people, all grinding forward with their own burdens. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. How did the meeting go? He didn't answer. Instead, he held his daughter and counted her breaths until they steadied, until the hiccuping sobs faded into occasional sniffles. He thought about the bills stacked on his kitchen counter, the electricity, the internet, Lily's occupational therapy sessions that insurance only partially covered. He thought about Sarah's medical debts, still outstanding, still accruing interest like some kind of malevolent organism. He thought about the small apartment they'd moved into after selling the house, about Lily's bedroom that barely fit her twin bed and dresser, about how she'd never complained, not once. "I'm sorry, Daddy," Lily whispered against his chest. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Lilypad. Nothing. I ruined your meeting." "You didn't ruin anything." Thomas tilted her chin up so she'd meet his eyes. "You hear me? You didn't ruin anything." But as he carried her out of the conference room, past the cubicles where his co-workers studiously avoided his gaze, down to the parking garage where his 12-year-old Honda waited with its check engine light perpetually glowing, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had broken. Not just in that meeting, not just in his career, something in the entire architecture of how his life was supposed to work. He buckled Lily into her booster seat, checked it twice the way he always did, then sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The parking garage was dim and cool, smelling of concrete and motor oil. In the rearview mirror, he could see Lily's reflection, her small face blotchy from crying, her eyes already heavy with the exhaustion that seemed to follow her everywhere since Sarah died. "Daddy?" she asked. "Are we in trouble?" The question was so earnest, so trusting, that it nearly shattered him. "No, sweetheart," he said, turning to face her. "We're not in trouble. Everything's going to be okay." It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that parents told to keep their children's worlds from collapsing. Thomas had become intimately familiar with such lies over the past 18 months. He started the car and pulled out of the garage, into the afternoon sunlight that felt too bright, too cheerful for the weight pressing against his chest. Traffic was moderate. It was only 2:30, too early for rush hour. They passed the elementary school where Lily should have been, where she'd missed another half day because of his meeting. They passed the park where they used to go on Saturdays, before weekends became just another extension of survival mode. They passed the grocery store where he'd have to stop later because they were out of milk and cereal and basically everything else. At a red light, his phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from the daycare director. Thomas, I understand you're in a difficult situation, but Lily's been absent or tardy 14 times this semester. We need to discuss this. Please call. The light turned green. Someone honked behind him. Thomas drove. Their apartment building was a 4-story walk-up in a neighborhood that the realtor had euphemistically called transitional. The hallway on their floor smelled like someone's curry dinner and someone else's cigarette smoke that seeped through the ventilation. Thomas had complained to the landlord twice about the smoking. The landlord had apologized and done nothing. Can I watch TV? Lily asked as Thomas unlocked their door. Half an hour, he said. Then homework. I don't have homework. Remember? I wasn't at school. Thomas closed his eyes. Right? Then half an hour of TV. Then reading time. Lily nodded and headed for the couch, which was also the couch from their old house. Reupholstered once after a wine incident at a dinner party 3 years ago in what felt like a different lifetime. Thomas went to the kitchen and stared into the refrigerator. Half a gallon of milk, some wilted lettuce, condiments, and a casserole from his mother that was probably 3 days past safe consumption. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he'd been avoiding. His sister, Rebecca, who lived in Portland with her husband, and their 2 perfect children in their perfect house with their perfect life. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. Thomas? Is everything okay? Why did everyone ask that? As if the answer could ever be anything but the same rehearsed response. I need to ask you something, Thomas said. Of course. Anything. He could hear children laughing in the background, the sound of a functional family doing functional family things. Do you think Mom would be willing to watch Lily for a while? Maybe a few weeks. There was a pause. Then, Thomas, what happened? Nothing happened. I need some time to sort things out with work. And it would be easier if you didn't have Lily. The words landed like an accusation, though Rebecca's tone had been gentle. That's not what I meant, Thomas said. Though wasn't it? I'm not trying to abandon her. I just need to stabilize things so I can actually provide for her properly. Mom's in Florida until December, Rebecca said. But Thomas, sending Lily away isn't going to solve whatever's really going on. I'm not sending her away. I'm asking for help. Those sound like the same thing from where I'm standing. Thomas's grip tightened on the phone. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. But how could he explain? How could he make Rebecca understand what it felt like to be drowning in slow motion? To watch everything slip through your fingers while you smiled and nodded and told your daughter that everything was going to be okay. How could he describe the particular hell of loving someone more than anything in the world while simultaneously resenting the impossibility of the situation? Forget I asked, Thomas said. Thomas! He hung up. It was rude, but he didn't have the energy for Rebecca's well-meaning concern. From the living room, he heard the opening theme of Lily's favorite cartoon. Something about magical creatures and friendship and problems that could be solved in 22 minutes. He leaned against the counter and let his head fall forward, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes until he saw stars. His laptop was on the kitchen table, where he'd left it that morning. He opened it and stared at the spreadsheet he'd been building for the past 3 months. Income versus expenses, color-coded by priority. The numbers didn't lie. Even with his current salary, they were barely making it. With an unpaid leave of absence, they'd be underwater in 6 weeks. Maybe 8 if he sold everything that wasn't nailed down. Thomas closed the laptop and walked to the living room. Lily was curled up on the couch, her thumb in her mouth. A habit she'd broken when she was 4 but had recently returned to. On the TV, animated animals were learning about the importance of honesty. He sat beside her and pulled her onto his lap. She came willingly, fitting perfectly against his chest the way she had since she was a baby. Lilypad, he said softly. I need to ask you something. Okay. What if Daddy had to work a little more for a while? Would you be okay with that? She pulled her thumb out of her mouth. Would I stay with Grandma? Maybe. Or maybe we'd find a really nice after-school program where you could make friends and do art projects and… Is it because of today? Lily asked, her voice small. Because I cried at your work? No, sweetheart. Today wasn't your fault. None of this is your fault. Then whose fault is it? The question was so simple, so direct, that Thomas found himself without an answer. Whose fault was it? Sarah's, for dying? The cancer's, for taking her? His own, for not being enough? Victoria Chen's, for refusing to see him as anything more than a productivity metric? Sometimes, Thomas said slowly, things are just hard, and nobody's fault. They're just the way things are. Lily considered this, her brow furrowed in that serious way she had. Emma says you're sad. I'm okay. Emma says you cry at night sometimes. In the kitchen when you think I'm asleep. Thomas's throat tightened. He hadn't realized Lily knew. He thought he'd been so careful, waiting until her breathing deepened before he let himself break down over the bills, over the impossibility of it all, over the sheer grinding exhaustion of being everything to everyone with nothing left for himself. Emma's very perceptive, Thomas managed. She says you need a hug. Thomas held his daughter tighter, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and the fabric softener he'd bought on sale, like childhood and trust and every promise he was terrified of breaking. I love you so much, he whispered into her hair. You know that, right? I know, Daddy. They sat like that until the cartoon ended and the next one began. Outside, the afternoon sun was sliding toward evening, painting their living room walls in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere in the building, someone was playing music, something classical, maybe Chopin. A siren wailed past on the street below, heading toward some emergency that wasn't his. Thomas thought about tomorrow, about the inevitable call from HR, about whether he should fight or fold, whether he should rage against Victoria Chen's cold efficiency or simply accept that this was how the world worked, that corporations had no room for messy human needs, that his love for his daughter was irrelevant to the machinery of profit margins and quarterly reports. He thought about the box in his closet, the one filled with Sarah's things. Her scarves that still smelled faintly of her perfume, her favorite coffee mug with the chip on the handle, the journal where she'd written letters to Lily for all the birthdays she knew she'd miss. He thought about how he hadn't opened that box in 6 months because opening it felt like drowning. He thought about the question Victoria had asked, the one he hadn't been able to answer, whether this position was the right fit for his current lifestyle. And for the first time, sitting in the golden light with his daughter in his arms, Thomas Spencer allowed himself to consider that maybe it wasn't. Maybe none of this was. Maybe he'd been trying to fit himself into a shape that no longer existed, contorting around edges that cut deeper every day. Daddy, Lily asked, are you crying? He touched his cheek and found it wet. Just a little. It's okay to cry, Lily said, parroting back the words he'd told her 100 times. Crying helps the sad come out. You're very wise, Lily Pad. I know, she said matter-of-factly. Emma tells me things. Thomas smiled despite everything. What does Emma say now? Lily tilted her head, as if listening to something he couldn't hear. She says we're going to be okay. But something has to change first. What has to change? She won't say. She says you have to figure that part out yourself. Thomas looked at his daughter's serious face, at the imaginary friend who appeared when Lily needed comfort, at the strange wisdom children sometimes possessed. And he wondered if maybe Emma was right, if maybe something fundamental needed to shift before they could move forward. He just had no idea what that something was, or how much it would cost him to find out. Thomas woke at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before his alarm. This had been happening for months now. His body's internal clock wound so tight that it wouldn't allow him the mercy of those extra minutes. He lay in the dark, listening to the building wake up around him. Footsteps above, pipes groaning, a door slamming 3 floors down. His bedroom was small, barely large enough for his queen bed and a dresser. The walls were still the landlord's original beige, marked here and there with scuffs he kept meaning to touch up. On his nightstand sat 3 things. a lamp, a water glass, and a photograph of Sarah from their wedding day. In the photo, she was laughing at something someone had said off camera, her head thrown back, her joy so complete that it seemed impossible she could ever be anything but alive. Thomas looked at that photo every morning. He didn't know if this was healthy or masochistic, but it had become part of his routine, like brushing his teeth or checking that the front door was locked. At 6 o'clock, he rose and padded to the bathroom. The shower was lukewarm. The building's hot water was temperamental at best, but he'd learned to make it work. 5 minutes under the spray, thinking about nothing, letting the water drum against his skull. Then out, dried, dressed in the same rotation of 3 work shirts and 2 pairs of slacks that he'd been cycling through since he'd donated most of his wardrobe to Goodwill last spring. By 6:20, he was in the kitchen, making coffee in the ancient Mr. Coffee machine that had been Sarah's grandmother's. The first cup he drank black and fast, standing at the counter, staring at nothing. The second cup he made with milk and sugar, Lily's preference, and poured into her favorite mug, the one with the cartoon unicorn whose horn was starting to fade from too many trips through the dishwasher. While the coffee cooled, Thomas made Lily's lunch. This was a precise operation. Turkey sandwich on whole wheat, crusts cut off, cut diagonally because she wouldn't eat it any other way. Baby carrots in a small container. Applesauce. A granola bar. A juice box. Everything in its proper place in her lunchbox, which was pink and covered in stickers she'd carefully selected and applied herself. He made this lunch 5 days a week, and every time he remembered how Sarah used to do it. She'd been creative. Little notes tucked into the lunchbox, sandwiches cut into shapes with cookie cutters, grapes frozen so they'd be cold by lunchtime. Thomas's lunches were functional, utilitarian. But Lily never complained. At 6:40, he woke her. This was the hardest part of the morning. "Lily pad," he said softly, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Time to wake up, sweetheart." She groaned and burrowed deeper into her pillow. Her room was decorated with remnants of childhood optimism. A mobile of paper cranes that Sarah had made hanging from the ceiling, glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the walls in no particular constellation, drawings taped up everywhere. In one corner sat a small bookshelf overflowing with picture books and early readers. In another, a bin of toys she rarely touched anymore. 5 more minutes, Lily mumbled. "We don't have 5 more minutes, baby. Remember we talked about this? We need extra time this morning." "Why?" "Because I have to get to work early today." This was a lie. He didn't have to be anywhere early. But the alternative, explaining that he needed to stop by HR first thing to potentially negotiate the terms of his professional demise, seemed cruel. Lily sat up, her hair a dark tangle around her face, her eyes puffy with sleep. She looked so much like Sarah in that moment that Thomas had to look away. "Can I wear my blue dress?" she asked. "It's in the wash. How about your jeans and the purple shirt?" "I hate that shirt." "Since when?" "Since always. It's itchy." Thomas closed his eyes and counted to 5. "Okay, pick something else. But we need to move fast. All right?" By 7:15, they were in the car. Lily had chosen a completely mismatched outfit, orange leggings, a green shirt with a dinosaur on it, and her winter coat even though it was 60 degrees out. Thomas had learned to choose his battles. Traffic was heavy on the route to Lily's school. Thomas gripped the steering wheel and tried to breathe slowly, the way the grief counselor had taught him. In through the nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out through the mouth for 4. "Daddy, you're doing your breathing thing," Lily observed from the back seat. "Just concentrating on driving, sweetheart." "No, you're doing your breathing thing. You do it when you're worried." Thomas glanced at her in the rearview mirror. When had she become so observant? "I'm fine. Emma says it's okay to be worried. She says being worried means you care about things. Emma's very wise." "I know. She says she used to be real a long time ago, before she became my friend." Thomas merged into the right lane, narrowly avoiding a pickup truck that had decided turn signals were optional. "What do you mean, before she became your friend?" "She says she lived a whole life. She had a daddy too and a sister and a dog named Copper. But then something happened and she had to wait a long time until she could find someone who needed her. That's a very detailed story, Lilypad. I'm not making it up, Lily said, her voice taking on that defensive edge. Emma's real. She's just invisible to everyone but me. Thomas had been through this conversation with Lily's pediatrician, who'd assured him that imaginary friends were normal, especially for children processing grief. Emma would fade in time, the doctor had said. Just let her be. But there were moments, like now, when the things Lily said about Emma felt less like imagination and more like something else. Something Thomas didn't have words for. They pulled up to Bright Horizons Elementary at 7:42. The morning drop-off line was chaos. As always, parents double parking, kids spilling out of minivans, crossing guards blowing whistles. Thomas pulled up to the curb and put the car in park. "Remember, I'm picking you up at 3 today," he said, turning to face Lily. "And tonight, we're having dinner with Grandma. Do we have to?" Lily. She always asks me weird questions. Like, do I remember Mommy? Of course I remember Mommy. Thomas unbuckled his seatbelt and twisted around fully. Grandma's trying to help. She doesn't always know the right way. I know. Lily grabbed her backpack and opened her door. "Bye, Daddy." "Hey." He reached for her hand before she could hop out. "You forgot something." She leaned back in and kissed his cheek. "Love you, Daddy." "Love you too, Lilypad. Have a good day." He watched her walk toward the school entrance, her backpack bouncing against her small frame, her orange leggings bright against the gray morning. At the door, she turned and waved. Thomas waved back. Then she was inside, and he was alone, and the day stretched ahead of him like an obstacle course. Henderson and Associates occupied the 7th and 8th floors of a glass tower downtown. Thomas parked in the garage, took the elevator up, and arrived at his desk by 8:20. The office was already humming with activity. Keyboards clacking, phones ringing, the espresso machine in the break room grinding beans into submission. His cubicle was a 6x6 space with gray fabric walls and a desk that had seen better decades. He'd personalized it minimally. A photo of Lily on his monitor, a small succulent plant that refused to die despite his neglect, and a quote tacked to his wall. "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." Churchill, supposedly, though Thomas had never verified. He logged into his computer and immediately saw 3 new emails. One from Janet in HR, confirming a meeting at 4 p.m. One from a client with questions about a forecast. One from David Park, with just a subject line, "Hang in there, man." Thomas started with the client email. This was easy, familiar territory, numbers and projections, scenarios modeled out to show best-case and worst-case outcomes. He lost himself in the work for almost an hour, until a shadow fell across his desk. "Thomas." He looked up to find Melissa Chong, one of the senior associates, holding 2 coffee cups. She set one on his desk. "Peace offering," she said. "Or solidarity. I'm not sure which." "Thanks, Mel." Thomas took the cup. It was from the good coffee shop 2 blocks away, not the sludge from the office break room. Melissa perched on the edge of his desk, her expression sympathetic. "I heard about yesterday. The whole office heard about yesterday." "Great. For what it's worth, I think Victoria was way out of line. We've all had personal emergencies." "It's not an emergency if it happens every week," Thomas said, echoing what he imagined Victoria's response would be. "Still, there's got to be some middle ground between firing you and just, I don't know, being human about it." Thomas sipped his coffee. It was good, rich, and smooth, the kind of coffee that cost $6 and was worth every penny. "I'm not getting fired. Just encouraged to take an unpaid leave of absence until I can commit fully to my role." "Which is basically firing you in slow motion." "Pretty much." Melissa was quiet for a moment. Then, "Have you thought about talking to her? Like, actually talking to her, not just through HR. And say what? Please have compassion for my situation?" "Victoria Chen doesn't do compassion." "I don't know about that," Melissa said thoughtfully. "I've been here 6 years, and I've seen her do some surprising things. She's not a monster, Tom. She's just focused. Maybe if you could find a way to help her understand." "Understand what?" That I'm a single dad who's barely holding it together? That my daughter has nightmares 3 times a week and won't sleep without the hall light on? That I'm drowning in debt and exhaustion and the weight of trying to be 2 parents at once? Thomas heard his voice rising and forced himself to stop. Sorry, that wasn't fair. It's okay. Melissa squeezed his shoulder. But yeah, maybe tell her some of that. Not the drowning part, but humanize yourself. Right now, you're just a number on a spreadsheet to her. Make her see you as a person. After Melissa left, Thomas sat with that thought. Make her see you as a person. As if Victoria Chen was the kind of woman who looked at people and saw anything beyond their utility. He pulled up her bio on the company website, something he hadn't done since his interview 4 years ago. Victoria Chen, CEO. MBA from Stanford. Previously VP of Operations at a Fortune 500 tech company. Board member for 2 nonprofits. There was a professional headshot. Victoria in a navy suit, her dark hair pulled back, her expression serious but not unkind. The bio mentioned nothing personal. No hobbies, no family, no interests beyond the professional. It was as if Victoria existed only within the confines of the business world. A ghost who materialized at 9 a.m. and evaporated at 6 p.m. Thomas closed the browser and returned to his work. He had a meeting at 10, another at 11:30, and the HR appointment at 4. Between meetings, he answered emails, updated spreadsheets, and tried not to think about how precarious his situation had become. At noon, he ate lunch at his desk. Leftover rice and chicken from 2 nights ago, microwaved to an unappetizing mush. Around him, coworkers were heading out in groups, laughing about weekend plans or complaining about the weather. Thomas kept his head down and chewed mechanically. His phone buzzed. A text from Lily's school. Hi, Mr. Spencer. Lily seemed upset during recess today. She's fine now but wanted you to know. Mrs. Patterson. Thomas's stomach clenched. He typed back, thank you for letting me know. Any details about what happened? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, she was sitting alone. When I asked if she was okay, she said she was talking to her friend Emma. Might be worth discussing with her tonight. Thomas set his phone down and pressed his palms against his eyes. He could feel the familiar pressure building behind his temples. The beginning of a headache that would bloom into something massive by evening if he didn't do something about it now. He swallowed 2 ibuprofen dry and went back to work. The afternoon crawled by with the particular slowness of time when you're dreading something. At 3:45, Thomas saved his work, closed his laptop, and walked down the hall to Janet Reeves's office. She was waiting for him with a folder and a sympathetic expression. Thomas, come in. Close the door, please. He sat in the chair across from her desk, a nicer chair than the ones in the conference room, leather and comfortable. Janet's office was decorated with photos of her family. Husband, 3 kids, a golden retriever, everyone smiling, everyone together. I'm going to be straightforward with you, Janet said. Victoria has asked me to formalize the discussion from yesterday. We'd like to offer you a 60-day unpaid leave of absence, during which time you can address your childcare situation and determine whether you're able to meet the expectations of your current role. And if I refuse the leave, then we'd need to discuss performance improvement plans, which would require even more intensive oversight and meeting attendance. Given your current circumstances, I don't think that's a viable path. Thomas leaned back in the chair. So my options are take unpaid leave or eventually be fired. Those are blunt terms. But essentially, yes. Can I ask you something, Janet? Off the record. She hesitated, then nodded. Off the record. Do you think this is fair? Janet was quiet for a long moment. Then, I think the world isn't always fair, Thomas. I think corporations have to maintain standards, and I think those standards sometimes hurt people who are already hurting. I think you're in an impossible situation, and I wish I had a better answer for you. But you don't. No, I don't. Thomas stood. I'll need to think about it. Take the weekend. Let me know Monday. He left her office and walked back to his desk in a daze. The office was emptying out. People heading home, heading to happy hours, heading to wherever people went when they had lives that weren't falling apart. Thomas gathered his things and headed to the parking garage. Traffic was murderous, but he didn't care. He drove on autopilot, his mind spinning through possibilities like a broken slot machine. He could take the leave, use the 60 days to find a new job, something with more flexibility. But who would hire someone with his baggage? Who wanted an employee who needed to leave early for school pickups and therapy appointments and the endless small emergencies of single parenthood? He could refuse and fight, lawyer up, claim discrimination, make noise. But he didn't have money for a lawyer, and the stress of a legal battle while trying to care for Lily seemed like its own kind of hell. He could accept that maybe he needed to step back. Find something part-time, even if it meant downsizing their already small life. Move somewhere cheaper. Ask his mother for help if she'd give it. Every option felt like failure. He picked Lily up from school at 3:15. She was waiting in the designated area, sitting on a bench with her backpack at her feet, talking to someone invisible. "Hey, Lilypad," Thomas said, crouching down. "Ready to go?" "Emma says hi," Lily reported. "Tell Emma hi back. How was your day?" "Fine. Mrs. Patterson said you seemed upset at recess." Lily's face closed off in that way it did when she didn't. "Want to talk about something?" "I was fine. Were you sitting by yourself?" "I was with Emma." Thomas wanted to push, to excavate whatever was troubling her. But he also knew that sometimes pushing Lily only made her retreat further. "Okay. Well, if you want to talk about it later, I'm here." "I know, Daddy." They drove to his mother's house in silence. Eleanor Spencer lived in a tidy ranch-style home in the suburbs, the same house where Thomas had grown up. The lawn was immaculate, the flower beds bursting with late-season mums, the shutters painted a cheerful yellow that Eleanor repainted every 3 years like clockwork. She was waiting at the door when they pulled up, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "There's my girl," Eleanor said, scooping Lily into a hug. "And there's my son who never calls." "I called you 2 days ago, Mom." "Exactly." Eleanor ushered them inside, where the smell of pot roast filled the air. Thomas's favorite, which meant his mother had been worried about him. She only made pot roast when she was worried. Dinner was fine. Eleanor asked Lily about school, and Lily gave one-word answers. She asked Thomas about work, and he deflected. They ate and made small talk and pretended everything was normal, which was exhausting in its own way. After dinner, Eleanor sent Lily to the living room to watch TV while she and Thomas cleared the table. "You look terrible," she said, not unkindly, as she scraped plates into the trash. "Thanks, Mom. I mean it. You've got circles under your eyes, you've lost weight, and you're wound tighter than a spring. What's going on?" Thomas considered lying, but what was the point? "Work's been difficult." "How difficult?" "They want me to take an unpaid leave of absence." Eleanor set down the plate she was holding with more force than necessary. "They want to what?" "It's not as bad as it sounds. It sounds like they're punishing you for being a single parent. They're saying I can't meet the demands of my position right now, because you're taking care of your daughter. Your daughter who lost her mother 18 months ago." Eleanor's voice was rising, her face flushing the way it did when she was truly angry. "This is discrimination, Thomas. You could sue them." "With what money, Mom? And even if I could, do you know what that would do to my career? I'd be unhireable." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, her jaw working. Then, "How much do you need?" "What? How much money do you need?" "To get through the leave of absence." "Mom, no. I have savings. Your father's life insurance. I can help." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "I can't take your money." "Why not?" "I'm your mother. That's what mothers do." "Because I'm 34 years old. Because I should be able to take care of my own daughter without my mother bailing me out." "Pride is expensive, Thomas." "It's not about pride." "Then what's it about?" He didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe he did, but it was too tangled up in grief and shame and the crushing weight of inadequacy to articulate. Eleanor dried her hands and turned to face him fully. "Let me ask you something. If Lily came to you in 25 years, struggling and drowning and too proud to ask for help, What would you want her to do? That's different. It's not different. It's exactly the same. She took his hands in hers. Thomas, you're not alone in this. You don't have to be alone in this. Let me help. Thomas looked at his mother, at her lined face, her graying hair, her eyes that held the same fierce love they'd held his entire life. He thought about his father, who died of a heart attack when Thomas was 21, who'd never met Lily but would have adored her. He thought about Sarah, who'd always said that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. I don't even know how much I'd need, he said quietly. Then figure it out. Make a budget. And we'll go from there. They finished the dishes in silence. In the living room, Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, her mouth slightly open. Thomas gathered her carefully, feeling her small weight against his chest, and carried her to the car. Think about what I said, Eleanor called from the doorway as he buckled Lily into her seat. I will. Thanks, Mom. And Thomas? Whatever you decide about the job, about asking for help, don't lose yourself in the process. Lily needs you, but she needs you whole, not ground down to nothing. Thomas drove home with those words echoing in his head. Lily stirred once, mumbling something about Emma, then settled back into sleep. The streetlights cast moving shadows across her face, and Thomas found himself memorizing the moment. Her peaceful expression, her small hand curled against her chest, the way her hair fell across her forehead. These were the moments he was fighting for. Not the job, not the salary, not even the stability. Just these small, ordinary moments of being her father. Back at the apartment, he carried Lily inside and tucked her into bed without waking her, pulling her blanket up to her chin and kissing her forehead. He turned on the hall light, the one she needed to sleep, and left her door cracked open. Then he went to the kitchen and opened his laptop. The spreadsheet stared back at him. Numbers in red and black, formulas calculating his slow descent into insolvency. But tonight, instead of despair, Thomas felt something else stirring. Something that might have been determination or might have been desperation. He wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. He opened a new document and began to write. Dear Ms. Chen, I am writing to request a meeting with you to discuss my current situation at Henderson and Associates. I understand that my recent attendance issues have been problematic, and I take full responsibility for the disruption this has caused. He stopped, deleted everything after discuss my current situation. I am writing because I believe there may be alternative solutions to an unpaid leave of absence that would benefit both the company and my family. Delete. I am writing to explain why I have been late to meetings and why I sometimes need to leave early. Delete. Thomas closed the laptop and put his head in his hands. Every attempt felt wrong, too apologetic, too defensive, too pathetic. How did you explain to someone like Victoria Chen that your life had been split in half? That you were trying to hold together the pieces with duct tape and determination, but the adhesive was failing? His phone buzzed. A text from David Park. Heard about the leave situation. That's rough, man. If you want to grab a beer and vent, I'm around. Thomas appreciated the offer, but the last thing he wanted was to sit in a bar and rehash his failures. He typed back, thanks. Rain check. Anytime. The apartment was quiet except for the ambient noise of the building. Footsteps above, muffled voices through the walls, the hum of the refrigerator. Thomas made himself a cup of tea he didn't want and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. On the counter, Lily's lunchbox sat open, tomorrow's lunch already packed. He'd done it automatically after putting her to bed, the routine so ingrained that his hands had moved without thought. Turkey sandwich, diagonal cut, crusts removed, carrots, applesauce, granola bar, juice box. He thought about Sarah, who would have known exactly what to do in this situation. Sarah, who'd been fearless and fierce, who'd negotiated her own salary up by 15% when she was 8 months pregnant, who'd once told off a rude waiter with such precision that the man had apologized and comped their entire meal. What would you do? Thomas asked the empty kitchen. No answer came because Sarah was gone, and he was alone, and no amount of wishing would change that. But as he sat there in the quiet, something occurred to him. Something Melissa had said earlier. Make her see you as a person. Victoria Chen didn't know him. Not really. She knew his attendance record and his work output and the numbers in his personnel file. But she didn't know about Lily's nightmares or Emma the imaginary friend or the way Thomas had learned to cook with one hand because Lily liked to be held while he made dinner. She didn't know about the pile of medical bills or the grief counseling or the small, daily miracles of survival. And maybe that was the problem. Thomas opened his laptop again and started a new email. This time, he didn't try to explain or justify or defend. He simply wrote the truth. Dear Ms. Chen, I would like to request a meeting with you to discuss my employment situation. I realize that my recent performance has not met expectations, and I believe a conversation, just the two of us, not through HR, might provide context that could help us find a workable solution. I am available at your convenience. Please let me know when might work for your schedule. Thank you, Thomas Spencer. He read it over 3 times, changed workable solution to mutually beneficial solution, then changed it back. Finally, at 10:47 p.m., he hit send. Then he closed the laptop, finished his tea, and went to check on Lily one more time before bed. She was still sleeping peacefully, her thumb having found its way to her mouth. Thomas carefully extracted it, straightened her blanket, and stood watching her for a long moment. We're going to figure this out, he whispered. I promise. It was the same lie he'd been telling himself for months. But tonight, for the first time, he almost believed it might be true. The next morning started the same as every other. 5:47 a.m. wake up, lukewarm shower, coffee in 2 stages. But when Thomas checked his email while Lily ate her cereal, there was a response from Victoria Chen. Timestamped 11:03 p.m. the previous night. Mr. Spencer, I can meet with you tomorrow at 7 a.m. in my office. Please confirm your availability. Victoria Chen. Thomas stared at the email. 7 a.m. Before most of the office arrived. A private meeting just as he'd requested. He typed back. I'll be there. Thank you. Daddy, you're smiling. Lily observed around a mouthful of Cheerios. Am I? Your mouth is doing the up thing. Thomas realized she was right. Despite everything. Despite the uncertainty and the fear and the exhaustion, he was smiling. Because for the first time in months, he'd done something proactive instead of reactive. He'd reached out instead of waiting to be acted upon. It was a small thing, possibly meaningless. Victoria Chen could spend their entire meeting explaining in detail why he needed to take the leave of absence. But at least he'd tried. Finish your cereal, Lilypad, he said. We've got a big day ahead. How do you know it's going to be big? Just a feeling. Lily considered this, then shrugged and returned to her breakfast. Through the kitchen window, the morning sun was breaking through the clouds, painting the world in shades of gold and promise. And for just a moment, Thomas let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Thomas Spencer's world shattered 18 months before our story begins. His wife Sarah lost her battle with breast cancer. A cruel fight that seemed won before the disease returned with devastating speed, taking her in just 6 weeks. Left behind were Thomas and their daughter Lily, then only 4.5 years old, too young to fully comprehend that mommy wasn't coming home from the hospital. The first year after Sarah's death was, in Thomas's own words, beyond description. Lily stopped sleeping through the night. She developed severe separation anxiety, experiencing panic attacks when Thomas tried to drop her off at preschool. To cope with her overwhelming grief, she created Emma, an imaginary friend who appeared whenever fear or sadness became too much to bear. Meanwhile, Thomas was drowning in his own ocean of grief while simultaneously trying to be both mother and father, to keep working full-time, and to hold space for his daughter's pain while managing his own. Thomas took just 3 weeks off after Sarah's death, far more than the company's 3-day bereavement policy, but nowhere near enough time to process the magnitude of his loss. He returned to his position at Henderson and Associates not because he was ready, but because he had no choice. Bills don't stop for grief. Lily needed food, housing, health insurance. Medical debt from Sarah's treatment loomed over them. Sitting at home drowning in sorrow wouldn't change their circumstances, so Thomas did what he thought he had to do. He went back to work and tried to hold everything together through sheer force of will. But holding it together proved impossible. The demands of single parenthood collided violently with the expectations of corporate life. When his regular babysitter's mother had a stroke, Thomas lost his childcare backup plan. He started missing meetings, leaving work early for emergencies, arriving late when Lily had nightmares. His performance suffered not because he stopped caring about his work, but because he was being pulled in too many directions at once. His colleagues noticed. Some, like Melissa from accounting, offered quiet support, bringing him coffee, covering for his absences when possible. David Park, a fellow analyst, recognized the signs of someone barely surviving and offered friendship. But others whispered. They questioned his commitment, his professionalism, whether he really belonged in a demanding corporate environment. The whispers eventually reached Victoria Chen, the company's senior director of human resources. Victoria was everything Thomas was not. Composed, controlled, with a pristine office that revealed nothing personal about the woman who occupied it. No family photos, no plants, no evidence of life outside those four walls. Just sleek furniture, abstract art, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She was efficient, professional, and seemingly devoid of the messiness that characterized Thomas's existence. When Victoria called Thomas into a conference room for what she termed a performance discussion, he knew his fragile world was about to collapse further. She presented the facts with clinical precision. His attendance record showed a pattern of absences and tardiness. He'd missed critical meetings. His work quality, while acceptable, had declined. From a purely professional standpoint, his performance was unacceptable. Victoria offered him a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Take a 60-day unpaid leave of absence to address his personal circumstances, or face a performance improvement plan that would almost certainly result in termination. She framed it as an opportunity, but Thomas heard it for what it was, a corporate solution to an inconvenient employee. Desperate to make Victoria understand, Thomas arrived at her office at 6:45 a.m., before most employees arrived, hoping to provide context that might change her mind. In that early morning meeting, with the building mostly empty and the city just waking beyond those floor-to-ceiling windows, Thomas did something he hadn't done with anyone at work. He told the complete truth. He explained Sarah's death, Lily's struggles, the impossible mathematics of single parenthood. He laid bare his grief, his exhaustion, his desperate attempts to provide stability for his daughter while keeping a roof over their heads. He wasn't making excuses, he insisted. He was simply trying to help Victoria understand that he wasn't a bad employee. He was just someone trying to keep his daughter afloat while also maintaining their livelihood. Victoria listened without interruption, her professional mask firmly in place. But when she finally spoke, her questions cut deeper than Thomas expected. Why had he returned to work so quickly? Had working actually helped him or Lily? What did his daughter truly need? The conversation escalated into something raw and painful. When Victoria suggested that perhaps his current arrangement wasn't serving anyone. Not him, not Lily, not the company. Thomas felt attacked. When she questioned whether what was best for Lily was having a father stretched so thin he was barely functional, Thomas exploded. She didn't understand his circumstances, his needs, what his daughter required. But Victoria's response stopped him cold. You're not holding it together. You're performing holding it together. There's a difference. The words landed with devastating accuracy because Thomas knew they were true. He wasn't actually managing his life. He was putting on a show of management while everything underneath crumbled. Thomas took the 60-day leave because he had no real alternative. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of job applications, mounting bills, and growing desperation. Every interview seemed promising until questions about availability arose. Could he work occasional evenings? Could he travel a few times a year? His honest answers about single parenthood and limited flexibility led to polite rejections, lowball offers, or uncomfortable silences that spoke volumes. Money became a constant source of anxiety. With no paycheck, Thomas watched his savings evaporate with terrifying speed. Electricity, internet, therapy appointments for Lily, each expense felt like another step toward financial collapse. He started making brutal choices at the grocery store, calculating the cost of every item, choosing the cheapest options regardless of what Lily preferred. When his daughter asked for strawberries or her favorite cookies, Thomas had to say no, had to watch her face crumple, had to feel like he was failing her in yet another way. His mother Eleanor called repeatedly, offering help that Thomas refused out of pride or stubborn independence or the desperate need to prove he could handle everything alone. But he wasn't handling it. He was drowning, and everyone could see it except him. A parent-teacher conference revealed that Lily's struggles were affecting her social development. She spent her time alone at school, talking to Emma, while other children teased her. Mrs. Patterson, her teacher, gently suggested additional counseling, grief support groups, more resources. Thomas took the handouts knowing he'd probably never call those numbers, because more appointments meant more time away from job hunting, more expenses he couldn't afford. One particularly low moment found Thomas at the grocery store, having denied Lily the small treats that used to be routine purchases. When she cried over Princess Sparkle cookies she couldn't have, Thomas snapped at her more harshly than intended, carrying his sobbing daughter out of the store while strangers judged him. Thomas felt like the worst father in the world. Later, Lily, speaking through her imaginary friend Emma, offered absolution. Emma says you're doing your best. She says sometimes the best isn't enough, but it's all we have. That night, sitting at his kitchen table with cheap whiskey and a laptop showing his inadequate resume, Thomas received an unexpected phone call from Community Family Services. His mother, refusing to watch him destroy himself, had contacted them on his behalf. Rachel Martinez offered sliding-scale childcare programs, emergency financial assistance, and a lifeline Thomas was too proud to grab for himself. His initial reaction was defensive. He didn't need charity. But looking around his apartment at the unwashed dishes, unfolded laundry, and unpaid bills, thinking about Lily crying over cookies, and the words of Victoria Chen echoing in his mind, Thomas finally admitted the truth. He needed help. When he called his mother to confront her about contacting family services, Eleanor's response was simple and devastating. We all need help, every single one of us. The only difference is some people are brave enough to accept it. That conversation marked a shift. Thomas scheduled a meeting with Rachel Martinez, poured the rest of his whiskey down the sink, and made a promise to his sleeping daughter. No more just surviving. They were going to actually live again. The meeting with Rachel was humbling but hopeful. She walked him through various programs, subsidized childcare, grocery assistance, funds for children's therapy. The applications were extensive and tedious, but Rachel was patient and kind, assuring Thomas that many people needed these services, and there was no shame in accepting community support. For the first time in months, Thomas took Lily to the park just for fun. They swung on swings, climbed on the jungle gym, fed ducks. Lily noticed the change in him. Emma says you look different today, less sad, more like how you used to be. Just as things seemed to be stabilizing, disaster struck. 6 weeks into his leave, Thomas received a call from Detective Sarah Blackwell of Child Protective Services. Someone had filed a report alleging that Lily was being neglected, that she was frequently absent from school, that Thomas was unstable, that his daughter showed signs of emotional distress. The accusation felt like a knife to the heart. Thomas had been struggling, yes, but neglecting Lily? Never. Everything he'd done, every sacrifice, every impossible choice had been for her. Detective Blackwell conducted a thorough investigation, interviewed Lily, assessed their home. She ultimately found no evidence of neglect or abuse. Lily was clearly loved and cared for. But the detective noted that the report had come from someone with detailed knowledge of Thomas's situation, someone who believed they were acting in Lily's best interest. Thomas realized who had made the call. Victoria Chen. The discovery ignited rage and betrayal. Victoria had nearly cost him his daughter. Whatever her intentions, she'd crossed an unforgivable line. Thomas demanded a meeting, ready for confrontation. But what he found instead was something unexpected: truth. Victoria explained that she'd called CPS because she genuinely believed Lily was at risk. What she'd seen, a child in crisis and a father at the end of his rope, reminded her of something from her own childhood. Victoria's mother had been a single parent working 3 jobs after her father left, exhausting herself trying to prove she could do everything alone. Victoria had spent her childhood watching her mother slowly destroy herself in the name of independence. "I don't want Lily growing up watching you do the same thing," Victoria said. She admitted she'd been wrong to call CPS, that she'd overstepped boundaries and acted from her own trauma rather than wisdom. She'd been in therapy herself, working through issues around her mother's breakdown. Seeing Thomas had triggered all those old fears, and she'd reacted poorly. But beneath the apology was a hard truth. What was Thomas's actual plan? When would barely holding on become real stability? It was the question Thomas had been avoiding for months. And he still didn't have a good answer. They talked for hours. Victoria shared pieces of her past that explained her rigid professionalism. It was armor against the chaos she'd grown up in. Thomas began to see her not as an adversary but as someone who understood his struggle from a different angle. Someone who'd been the child watching a parent suffer. When Victoria offered Thomas the chance to return to Henderson and Associates with real accommodations, 30-hour weeks, remote work twice weekly, strict boundaries around evening commitments, it felt like a lifeline. The salary would be lower, but combined with the assistance programs Rachel had helped him access and support from his mother, it would be enough. More importantly, it would be sustainable. 3 months after that conversation, Thomas returned to work under the new arrangement. The office felt different, or perhaps he felt different. His colleagues knew his story now. Not all the details, but enough to understand. Melissa still brought him coffee. David Park checked in regularly. Even Victoria, in her controlled way, offered support. Lily started attending a grief support group for children. Slowly, gradually, Emma began appearing less frequently. The imaginary friend who'd helped a 4-year-old process impossible loss was needed less as Lily found other ways to cope. The nightmares didn't disappear entirely, but they softened. She started making friends at school, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Thomas learned something he wished he'd understood 18 months earlier. Asking for help wasn't weakness. Community support wasn't charity. Survival was necessary, but truly living, really living, not just existing, required letting others share the weight. Pride had nearly cost him everything. Humility, paradoxically, had saved him. This story isn't really about workplace performance metrics or corporate policy, though those elements provide the framework. It's about grief, how it breaks us, how we try to manage it, and how sometimes our attempts to be strong actually make us weaker. It's about single parenthood and the impossible calculations involved in being everything to a small person who's already lost so much. It's about the danger of toxic independence, the American myth that we should be able to handle everything alone, that needing help represents personal failure. Thomas nearly destroyed himself and traumatized his daughter trying to live up to that impossible standard. But it's also about the people who see our struggles even when we try to hide them. Melissa with her coffee. David with his friendship. Rachel Martinez with her patient guidance through assistance programs. Eleanor Spencer refusing to let her son drown in pride. Even Victoria Chen, who made a terrible mistake but did so from a place of genuine concern informed by her own trauma. The story reveals that sometimes the people we perceive as enemies are fighting their own battles, carrying their own wounds. Victoria's rigid professionalism wasn't cruelty. It was protection against becoming her mother. Her disastrous CPS call wasn't malice. It was panic at seeing history repeat itself. On Lily's 7th birthday, she made a wish over her candles. When Thomas asked what she'd wished for, she smiled and said, "Emma says I can tell you this one. I wished that you'd keep being happy tired instead of sad tired." Thomas pulled her close, recognizing how far they'd come. From that conference room where Victoria had told him he was performing rather than living, through the darkest moments of financial desperation and fear, through the CPS investigation and the painful revelations that followed, they'd somehow found their way to something better. Not perfect. Life after loss is never perfect, but sustainable, livable, real. "I think that wish might just come true," Thomas told his daughter. And in that moment, holding Lily close, he actually believed it. If this story moved you, if it resonated with your own struggles or helped you understand someone else's, please subscribe. We share stories about real human experiences. The messy, complicated, beautiful, and heartbreaking moments that connect us all. Because sometimes we need to hear that we're not alone in our struggles, that asking for help is brave, and that survival, while necessary, is just the beginning of learning how to truly live again. Subscribe to hear more stories that honor the complexity of being human.